This conversation involves topics of mental health and suicide. 3 years ago, federal authorities officially launched the 988 Suicide Prevention Helpline to help those wrestling with suicidal ideation. Despite the increase in calls, though, the number of suicides continues to climb. I'm Nick Reagan, and in today's Live 5 Deep Dive, I'm sitting down with anchor reporter Caroline Spikes to dive into the data. Caroline, thanks for making the time to share with us some of your reporting on this topic.
Of course, I'm happy to be here. This is a very serious topic, and I think it's one that affects us all one way or another.
Well, you've been looking at the data now for a while. What have you found?
Yeah, it's interesting. We first reached out to all the local coroner's office, especially here in the Tri-County, and we also reached out to Greenville County because that is a pretty similar size when it comes to population to Charleston County. And I think something, looking big picture at the overall numbers and statistics is all of them were pretty proportional when it comes to the population size, which I think is something to note. In the more recent years, there are some inconsistencies, but in the last 10 years, or in comparison from now to 10 years ago, suicide rates are up. And there are plenty of factors. You can't really have one thing to point a finger at, but Dr. Sarah Coker, who's the director of psychiatry at Roper St. Francis, she has a theory.
There's still a lot of changes that we're seeing from the pandemic. The pandemic really wreaked havoc on people, especially on the younger generation. Many kids who, in a time when they needed to learn how to socially interact with others, were learning from home. Human nature is to be social, is to interact. And you took an entire population and said, stay inside. And people were struggling with loss of interaction, loss of community, loss of income, loss of jobs, instability. And so we're still seeing ramifications from that years later.
In fact, suicides in South Carolina jumped about 8% since 2010.
Obviously, in the last 10 years, we have seen the population increase, which has lended itself to seeing higher numbers of suicides, which in turn has created a higher rate of suicides as well. But we've also seen a lot of extra money, effort, time, energy being put into resources dedicated to preventing suicides. What have you found?
Yeah, I think a lot of it points to this newer generation, to the younger generation. I mean, suicide awareness and mental health awareness, it has gained a ton of just traction over the last recent years. I mean, we see it in all around us. We see it in social media. We see these influencers, these brands doing these campaigns, having these open and honest conversations. You see it in this kind of media. It really is all around us, and TV shows and movies sharing the ugly truths of what is mental health. And despite all of these new resources, Dr. Coker says there's a whole lot more pressure that comes with, the ties of your phone into the outside world.
We have a greater population of youth now seeing and being exposed to things that most people were not exposed to at young ages, things that they're seeing that they are not equipped to be able to handle, to process. And it can be traumatizing to them. It can be life-changing to them as far as how they view themselves and set themselves up for anxiety and in turn depression. And we don't have a good outlet for them or a good way to fix it because this is new.
Suicide and suicidal ideation is something that some folks struggle with, not just one, moment in their life, but for some of these people, they're struggling with these thoughts and things like depression their entire life. It's a daily struggle. You actually spoke with someone who has had a number of suicides in their family, and they've really, this has really impacted them on a very personal level.
I sat down with Sherry Wallace, and her and I talked for about an hour and a half just about her story. And she took me back 14 years ago when she received 2 phone calls, 12 days apart from one another. The first was from her brother telling her that her stepfather, Steve, had committed suicide. And 12 days later, she got another phone call.
I answered the phone, and she said, Mom is gone. And I'm like, what do you mean Mom is gone? She said, Mom took her own life. And I handed the phone to my husband and I screamed. I remember I got down on my hands and I said, I can't do this again.
And like I said, that was 14 years ago, but Sherry is still searching for answers. And unfortunately, those are questions that she can't get answers to.
Why? Why did they do that? How did they get to a point where it was dark and that they couldn't get out of it? Why, why this day? Why, why in the first place? I mean, how could you feel? There's just so many of the unanswered questions. If you have somebody that's sick in your life and they pass, you know that they're going to, you just don't know when. Whereas with the suicide, it's so unpredictable and you don't know when. So that grief is a lot different.
We talked about the fact that younger folks are experiencing all this pressure, and that pressure is leading them down dark paths. But we've also talked about Sherry, who has two parents that committed suicide 12 days apart. It seems like this isn't really an age thing. I think lots of us think younger people are more susceptible to suicidal ideation, but your reporting is showing that that's not necessarily true.
And I asked Dr. Coker, is there an age group that may suffer more than the other? And she explained that suicide, mental health, it doesn't discriminate. You can see it anywhere. And oftentimes oftentimes the face of suicide can be hidden behind someone with a smile. And I think, that's the bigger cry for help here.
Of course, Caroline, there are always warning signs. I think we all sort of have an idea of what the warning signs look like, certain phrases that people say, or somebody clearly in a depressed state. But there are some warning signs that are maybe not as common, but should present some red flags that maybe I need to have a conversation, or maybe I need to check in on that person. What did Coker tell you about some of these warning signs?
Yeah, I think if you take a look at your loved one and they're not doing activities they once enjoyed, or they, don't move as much, or, in the younger generation, you might see more substance abuse or trying to find something to numb that kind of pain.
The warning signs are still there, and there are some similarities for young and old, and then some differences. Some of the most common things that you'll see in both is just this tunnel vision. All of a sudden it's feeling hopeless. There's no way out. They can't see that there's anything else there because they're so pigeonholed almost into this idea that this is all that there is left. And so in both young and old, mostly in old, you'll see this idea of giving away their prized possessions, belongings, saying their goodbyes. I've always wanted you to have this, or if I'm never around, just know I loved you. Very sad, tell them that you're like, oh, they're just telling me they love me, but maybe a warning sign, why are they telling me it that way right now?
In addition to that, too, there's, your diet. There's, are you as active? Is there a noticeable difference in your appearance or in your weight even? And when you go to approach your loved one who you think might be struggling, or even just having a conversation with them and they might be a little bit more irritable or have an angry response, that can also be a warning sign.
But there are some things that you shouldn't do. What did Coker tell you about, what you shouldn't do when somebody is maybe feeling a little down or looking a little bit depressed?
Yeah, I think, of course, you want to be there and support your loved one as best as you can, but trying to come in with, hey, these are all the things that you need to be grateful for. Look all around you. Look how amazing your life is. You shouldn't be feeling this way. That's where Coker says that's where we go wrong oftentimes. And I think, honestly, that's our human nature, is to want to come in and to fix, but everyone can relate when you're in this mindset And Coker explains it and describes it as a tunnel vision. When you're in that tunnel vision of whatever you're fixated on, it's really difficult to get out of that by someone constantly pulling at you. You know, you need to go about it in a different way where you don't inflict a certain kind of guilt on them.
Right. I think she sort of describes it as you don't want to go in to try to cheer them up. And I think it's a lot more about sort of understanding where that person is in their life and you know, slowly helping them work through what's going on in the mental process than to simply show up and say, hey, you should be happy because the sun is shining and the flowers look nice and you have enough to eat on the table or whatever. There are just so many factors involved that coming in and saying everything's good or it's fine is often not enough.
Rather than going in and, like you said, making someone or cheering them up a little bit by force is asking the simple question of, are you okay? Have a conversation. Dr. Coker said that, you know, there's a lack of that nowadays in our society, is you aren't having those conversations as much. And at the end of the day, vulnerability creates vulnerability. And I think that can be really helpful if you are approaching your loved one who you think are portraying these warning signs rather than coming in and wanting to fix them, quote unquote, fix them, is just having a conversation at the end of the day.
Yeah. But Coker also had some advice on some of the best things you can do if you're in one of these states. What is that?
Number one, get professional help. Reach out and ask. Those resources are there. That 988 hotline is there, or 988 helpline is there. But she also stresses the importance of sleep. You know, she says it's a cliche, but sleep really is the best thing for us, and taking care of your body physically. You know, she talks about the mind being such a powerful organ. I mean, it tells us how to walk. It tells us when to, you know, feel the way we do and what's appropriate, what to say. And it can have a lot of power of your physical body as well. So, you know, in a way, this mental health, if you're not mentally healthy, then, you know, there's a chance your physical body can take a toll, you know, when you're not taking care of your mind.
Yeah, I mean, sleep is so important for everything from your physical health to your mental health. And I think if you can put away the phone, if you can turn the TV off, a lot of people, including myself, sleep to, you know, an episode of The Office or whatever it is. But all that stimulus is keeping your mind awake and not allowing your body to fully enter into that REM sleep that is so needed for both your physical health, but also your mental health to sort of reset everything, get the levels right and be able to attack the next day. So I think absolutely sleep is a huge factor in everything that we do. But if sleep is not enough, and it oftentimes isn't for these folks, it's just sort of the first stepping stone, there are some resources available. And those resources have become more common because of people like Sherry.
Yeah, that's right. Sherry is part of the National Alliance of Mental Illness, and she's dedicated her life to preventing suicide and helping those impacted by mental health, and also family members and loved ones who have been impacted by suicide. So she was traveling back and forth from Florida to Charleston for a handful of years, and she finally decided to move to the Low Country. And she said the very first things, or one of the very first things she did when she moved here, was to get plugged in to NAMI. That was a non-negotiable for her because she knows, you know, there needs to be a voice for the voiceless, and she's taken on this advocacy role.
The first of everything after your loved one is gone, the first birthdays, the first holidays, those are really, really hard for a lot of people. And to be around other people that understand that, it is so welcoming. Going to group and talking to other people, I felt a sense of belonging, that I had a group and those people understood what I was going through.
yes, we're seeing an increase in these resources. In, schools, we're having more mental health counselors in schools. We're having conversations in schools and work, in social media, on TV and movies all around us. However, there still is a lot of work to be done. And Dr. Coker and Sherry, they both address that. And specifically, Dr. Coker says there's, a lack of access to these resources. There are so many resources all across the nation and in the low country, but access to those resources is where it's hurting people the most. With lack of funding, it really takes a hit on, this access, and even hiring more providers, because there's not as much funding. And Dr. Coker says, yes, throwing money at a problem doesn't fix it, but it sure does help. And I think through my conversations too, they both made it clear what also helps is putting down your phone and being present with one another as a community, and having those conversations, just having a conversation could really help someone if you or your loved one are struggling. I think there needs to be more connection in, our society.
Well, hopefully as those resources get more access and people become more aware of them, we'll eventually start to see the suicide rates come down and maybe long term, hopefully hit zero altogether. Caroline Spikes, thank you.
Thank you.
If you or anyone you know is struggling with suicidal ideations, you are encouraged to call the 988 helpline. Those 3 numbers could save a life.